I'll get it started off. What is Kansas losing in Andy Kotelnicki going to Penn State? What was he able to do that worked so well at Kansas? What is he leaving behind?
So Kotelnicki is the ultimate, I guess, chess kind of guy. Like he is very multiple in his offense. Everything he talks about is that he wants to be the hardest offense to prepare for week in and week out. They're very process oriented is Kansas overall as a program, including himself. And he is someone who that is his goal. His goal isn't put up X amount of points or do this or that. Now they're a lower tempo team. You look at some of the point per game numbers and, Kansas still ranked well in the Big 12, but you look at the yards per play. If you look at more of the efficiency stuff, they're one of the best offenses in the league. So, like for instance, they're top 3 in yards per pass. They're one of the best yards per run team. Last year, that was the case too. They were one of the ones up there with TCU, and in some cases were better than TCU in like yards per play and rushing yards per play. So not a super high tempo, very balanced. They run and pass kind of equal amounts. And it's not one of those guys who he's like, oh, we have to run and pass equal amounts just because. He will do in certain games. They will run it more. They ran for almost 400 yards against UCF. In certain games, they will throw it all over the field. They threw for like 400 yards against Oklahoma State. It just kind of depends what you're trying to take away, and they will do other things. A lot of weird formations, a lot of weird shifts, a lot of weird motions, a lot of different personnel packages where they have specific players utilized in specific personnel packages. He is an excellent offensive coordinator. And I think Penn State's getting a really good one.
Is he now? You mentioned balance and the creativity. If you had to go one way or another, is he someone that is going to really? Are the running backs going to benefit more, or does Drew Aller and Bo Pribula? Because we saw that he wasn't afraid to use 2 quarterback systems when both of those guys were available, Daniels and Bean, and it worked very well. It wasn't just a one-off play where the 2 quarterbacks would come in. It was integrated into the game plan and something defenses really had to plan for. But one side or the other, is he more of a running backs guy or is he more of a quarterbacks guy?
He is really just balanced. I mean, it's going to hurt a little bit of the top running, like Devin Neal, for instance, who's the Jayhawks stud running back right now. He has over 1,200 yards. He only has like 183 carries. So if you look at their 11 Power 5 running backs right now that have 1,100 or more rushing yards, Devin Neal is first among all of those 11 in yards per carry. But he wasn't on any of the Doak Walker semifinalist list or anything because – they're splitting carries with that other guy. His saying he's had in the past was a pair and a spare. They like to have 2 running backs. They rotate in. Both are going to get similar to equal carries. And then the other guy is kind of just the late in game or if there's an injury. With the quarterback, it's a quarterback-friendly system because of a lot of the motions are going to help you figure out the defense, make the reads for everything. And because you run the ball well, I mean, it's just, the one thing that'll be interesting is they ran a lot of QB runs here at Kansas. Obviously, that doesn't seem to be as much of the skill set of Drew Aller. He has been someone, though, whether he's been at Buffalo or Kansas, they adjust to the personnel. So as much as I look at what he's done here at Kansas, I don't know how applicable it will and won't be to Penn State. Some of the stuff will, some of it won't. They had QB injuries. They never really were rotating quarterbacks at Kansas. Like that was something that goes back to Lance Leipold. They don't like to rotate quarterbacks. They like to stick with a guy. The only reason it's been multiple quarterbacks here is just because of injuries. But you go back to his days at Buffalo before Kansas. He had 1 year where they led the MAC in passing yards, and that was when Tyree Jackson, who ended up going off to the NFL after, was their quarterback. The very next year when he went off to the NFL, they became the number 1 team in the MAC in rushing yards because they adjusted to their personnel. So he really is, whatever you have, he is going to emphasize that. He is not really, I have to do this or I have to do that. But certainly it is a balanced offense, one where, like KU has some really good receivers. You look at Pro Football Focus, they're top 10 in the country in receiving grade, but they don't really have anybody who's above, 700, 800 receiving yards because it's a bunch of receivers. It's a bunch of tight ends. It's a bunch of running backs. It's balance between running and throwing the football. So a really good offensive coordinator, tough to prepare for. And he just kind of helps everyone because he makes everybody's job a little bit easier.
Derek, how would you say the Big 12, the caliber of defense in the Big 12 was this season and the past 2 years?
I think it's definitely one of those things where it's underrated. Obviously, you get the idea of the Big 12 from when like I was growing up and it was everybody was running air raid or spread. And you think of the year with 08 with like Sam Bradford and Colt McCoy and all these guys. It is kind of transitioned. I think one of the big teams to do that, Iowa State, like they've had a top 20 defense and some years like top 10, top 5 defense over the past couple of years. And a lot of teams have started running what they do, which is this kind of like 3-3-5 stack. You see other teams run variations of it, like a 3-2-6, and it's helped slow down some of the passing games. So you've had like good defenses in the Big 12 here lately. Like Oklahoma's a top 35 defense. Texas has a top 15 or top 10 defense. Iowa State's got a top 20 defense in the country right now. Kansas State typically pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. If you look at Bill Connolly's ESPN SP Plus, the Big 12 is basically in line with the ACC and the Pac-12 in terms of defensive rating right now. Overall as a conference. So it's no longer like there was a couple of years ago, the Oklahoma State team that lost to Baylor in the Big 12 title game. That team was having statistically by some measurements, the best defensive Big 12 season like ever. So it actually has started to shift a little bit. It's still not a fully defensive conference or anything like that, but there are a lot more better defenses. And like I said, kind of in line with what the Pac-12 and the ACC are at right now.
We'll get to the comments in just a moment. I see some good questions here. Another one I wanted to ask Derek was what his overall responsibilities at Kansas, because he was the offense. He wasn't a position coach. He was the offensive coordinator and the associate head coach. James Franklin says he values head coaching experience above all else, especially for his coordinator spots. Joe Moorhead was the Fordham head coach when he took over. And then, I know some changes were made and they didn't necessarily get that head coaching experience that they wanted at the OC spot over the past few years. But then Manny Diaz comes in, and he's a former head coach, and James Franklin reiterated again, I want head coaching experience as best as I can. Well, Kotelnicki has not been a head coach anywhere along the way, but he has had the associate title at Kansas. What were his responsibilities? How did Lance Leipold allow him to run his system independently?
Yeah, Leipold very much is kind of more of your CEO style of head coach, and he kind of sits back and lets guys run things. Like he doesn't interfere. He's in on everything, and they all are very kind of meshed together and understand the same message and same type of thing they're doing. So they're all on the same page, and once they're all on the same page, it is very much, I kind of let you do what you want to do and let you be loose in certain ways. So yeah, from that standpoint, he doesn't have the head coaching experience, but he has been basically given that, you are the head coach of the offense, so to speak.
Let's go to the comments here. And I like this one from Steven. How are his in-game adjustments and does he do it fast? I imagine that not necessarily tempo, but how quick is he to say, all right, this isn't working, let's scrap it. I've also seen Kansas fans say that Kotelnicki, some of his best coaching comes from when Kansas was at a deficit. What would you say to all of that, Derek?
Well, so this year, Andy Kotelnicki had to be into a position where they got to their third string quarterback. So Jalen Daniels comes in as the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Right. He injures his back. Then Jason Bean comes in. He's playing really well. And then against Texas Tech, Jason Bean gets injured. Their third string quarterback was a former true freshman walk-on quarterback. They gave him a scholarship about a month ago. He has to come into the Texas Tech and Kansas State games. And in both of those games, you end up, they're shut out at halftime. They adjusted well at half. They put up 13 in the second half, struggled a bit in the red zone in that game, but you saw it get better. Kansas State game, they come right out of the locker room and score a touchdown. The TCU game last year, which was the game that they ended up losing 38-31. Kansas was shut down at halftime of that game, and Jalen Daniels gets hurt at the end of the half. They have just 3 points at halftime against TCU. They put up 28 in the second half against TCU. So he's adjusted well at halftime. He's been able to do more with less. Yeah, whether they've gotten to the backup quarterback or the third string quarterback, he'll adjust to what you kind of need to have happen in both of those areas. I think really the only, knock at times is sometimes it gets too cute. There are a lot of trick plays, a lot of fun formations. Sometimes you'll get the comments about, oh, you went too far there, or just, be normal on this possession or be normal on that play or do something like, for instance, KU was down 13-10 to Texas Tech. And there was certainly some, outcry about this call. They ran a wildcat with the running back and let him throw the ball on 3rd and goal from the 4 against Tech when they were down 3, and then ended up not getting it. It was his first throw of the year and everything like that. So sometimes that can be the one knock. But as far as adjustments, he tends to adjust, and maybe it'll, If they come in with a game plan of we're going to run it down their throat, maybe they'll try it for a couple series. But if it starts to open up, like for instance, this past week against Cincinnati, Cincinnati was throwing a bunch of numbers to stop the run, and they were stopping. I mean, Kansas had 2 drives without points to open the game. And then all of a sudden, Kansas started opening it up, and Jason Bean was 10 for 10 at halftime passing the ball. So he will adjust as the game goes on. He makes pretty quick adjustments as the game goes.
We'll take one final question from the comment section. How does he call a game for a pocket passer versus a mobile quarterback?
Obviously, with Kansas, he's had the mobile quarterback, Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean. Now, Cole Ballard is more of, I wouldn't consider him a mobile quarterback. He's more of like a moxie type of runner where he can run, but it's more of just like, he's not out speeding or anyone. When they do have the fast quarterback, you'll see them run a bit of triple option, read option. You'll see him run speed option to the outside. When you have the more, pocket passer type, you won't see him call that stuff as much, but he's still going to call, some of the speed option stuff, because that can just involve reading the defense and knowing when to pitch it more than anything. At Buffalo, that would probably be better for that, because at Kansas, he's had it the entire time. At Buffalo, he did have at times, like I think Kyle Van Treese, he wasn't like a super mobile quarterback, and they were able to call an efficient offense. That became more of a running offense and a play action offense. So, with more of a pocket passer, maybe more under center, more play action game, whereas versus with the, more mobile guy, maybe you are going to see more of an option type of game. But like I said, he tends to adjust, and he's a really good offensive coordinator at picking and choosing stuff from around the country, from the NFL, that he'll make work whatever personnel they have. So I don't know how athletic Drew Aller is, but I wouldn't really be worried about it, because he has been able to adjust over the course of his time as the offensive coordinator, wherever it's been, at Buffalo or Kansas.
Drew isn't exactly a statue, but he's not your straight line track star speedster. He actually, Mike Yurcich utilized him more so than we thought he should have been as a dual threat quarterback. Drew Allers, he can get you 5 to 7 yards on third down when you don't spy the quarterback, and he's actually really good within the pocket. He has good tight area speed and I would say quickness. But if you're talking about a 40-yard dash, Derek, it's no contest. That other guy's probably going to win. But Drew Aller by no means is a statue. Derek, I won't take up too much of your time. I got 2 more questions that I think are pertinent here. And it's, how is Kotelnicki as a recruiter? Because Penn State doesn't make this move if there isn't some influence on recruiting.
Well, that's what's kind of interesting here, is that when you look at KU's recruiting class, if you compare KU's to Penn State's, it's not going to be, it's for Penn State to be a bad recruiting class. But for KU, it's one of their best recruiting classes that they've had in quite some time. But a majority of the guys, Kotelnicki was not the main recruiter, and on a majority, he wasn't even the secondary recruiter. He more so was just kind of a guy over that, all the coaches, they meet with all the coaches, and you get your conversations, and everybody kind of has the same message for KU. And so from that standpoint, he was. But from the KU perspective, he wasn't one of their big time recruiters. Like, they have a 4-star quarterback from Detroit, Isaiah Marshall, who just won the state title for them. He was recruited by the quarterback's coach, who now has been promoted to co-offensive coordinator since the news of Kotelnicki. And then they have a bunch of these big recruits from Arizona. One of them has offers lately from Michigan and stuff as a defensive end, but that was their defensive backs coach. So he hasn't really been known for being a recruiter. He is a super gregarious, funny guy. In the press conferences every week, he brings people candy. He brings up, thought teasers to open things up. He's a funny guy. He has a good personality, more than just football. He's a really good dude. But I haven't seen a huge impact on the recruiting trail. So I don't know. That kind of remains to be seen for me.
Okay. That's interesting, because if James Franklin feels confident in what he has as a recruiting base, the network that he's built, the coaching staff devoted to that, maybe Kotelnicki is brought in to simply just coach and game plan and call the right plays. But that would make sense. And then he just focuses on what he needs to focus on instead of being spread too thin. Derek, final question I have is, Kansas seems like they, Lance Leipold, the players are committed to him. And with what Penn State has at quarterback, running back, wide receivers, obviously a huge question mark here. What I'm getting at is, do you think that Kotelnicki will bring any Kansas players with him in the transfer portal?
It's definitely possible. Jim Zabrowski, who they again promoted from QB coach, he has a good relationship with a lot of the players. And if they retain the rest of the staff, I don't totally know. Now, I don't really expect. I mean, Jason Bean's graduating. Jalen Daniels already announced he's coming back to KU for next year, so
Okay.
I think he'll be back. When you look at the running back position, like Devin Neal, who's their stud running back, he might just go pro anyway, and he's a Lawrence kid,
Mhm.
so I don't think that would be in the cards. When you look at the receivers, there has been a little bit of murmurs that maybe there could be some movement with some players leaving. So that would be the one that I'm kind of looking at. Now, he is the tight ends coach at Kansas. So maybe you would look at, some of the tight ends, maybe some of those guys would bring along. But like Jared Casey's a local Kansas kid. And he is somebody who, I don't know, like I don't expect him to go there. And I think I saw a comment earlier, Penn State's had tight ends as a strength. So maybe it doesn't make sense. Plus KU's all Big 12 tight end is graduating at the end of the year anyway. So I don't know. I guess it wouldn't shock me, but at the end of the day, as long as KU retains their staff, I don't know how much is going to interest Penn State. So it wouldn't shock me if maybe a receiver or something like that does end up going over, but I could more so see if KU loses a couple players because this move, maybe it's just out in the open anywhere else in the transfer portal.
So Kotelnicki did have influence on the tight ends, you're saying?
Yeah, he was the tight ends coach in addition to being the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
Used him in a ton of ways. They had a bunch of packages where they had 2 tight ends on the field, 3 tight ends on the field. They threw to him a good amount. They were key in the blocking game. And I think Mason Fairchild, who was, didn't really have a ton of production his first 3 years at Kansas, he's now turned into, he was second team all Big 12 last year. He was honorable mention Big 12 this year. He might have a chance at an NFL shot, maybe as a late draft pick or as an undrafted guy. Jared Casey, he's turned into a really valuable player as a former walk-on. So he does a lot of work on the offensive line and tight end game. He's a former offensive lineman himself from back in the day. He ran a triple option offense when he was playing back in the day. So yeah, he worked most closely with the tight ends. I don't know what he'll be doing at Penn State.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because I did say, because I want to correct myself then, because I said he didn't really work with the positions as closely or didn't have a position title. And that's from the Kansas website. It said that he was the offensive coordinator and the associate head coach. So I wonder if maybe Ty Howell switches to quarterbacks or something like that. And I know Ty Howell's the tight ends coach currently at Penn State. And then Kotelnicki takes over tight ends and is the offensive coordinator as well. But he's probably going to be dropping that associate head coach title.
Yeah, it could. And also it could work with the offensive line because his experience there and tight end in a way is an extension of that. So it wouldn't shock me one way or another what he's working with. But I think overall, I would be very excited. If I were a Penn State fan, this guy gets a lot with less. This guy gets a lot of matchups for his players. He runs a pro style offense in some ways in that they're going to use personnel in a pro style, but he's going to be creative with it. The amount of motions and formations and creativity that he uses is subpar. And I know certainly people are missing in him and already, some of the message boards here are freaking out about losing him. So, which is, I think, a good sign for another school picking him up.